In the last days of the Mafia's reign, nicknames became both armor and evidence. The dons of this era lived under headlines, names the press loved and the FBI recorded. These are the stories of how the underworld's final generation got the labels that followed them into courtrooms and history books. He was born Angelo Salvatore Ruggiero on July 29, 1940 in East New York, Brooklyn, a place where crime wasn't a secret, it was a tradition. His father worked hard and stayed straight, but the streets around him belonged to another kind of worker. The mob soldier, the bookmaker, the man with envelopes instead of paychecks. Ruggiero grew up in that world. By his teens, he was already running errands for the Gambino family. He met a local kid named John Gotti, and the two became inseparable. They were street soldiers with ambition, smart enough to climb, reckless enough to take chances. They called him Quack. The story goes that he earned the nickname because he never stopped talking. A fast, loud voice that filled every room. In a business built on silence, that stood out. Some say it started as a joke from his own crew. Others claim it came from the FBI, who'd grown used to hearing his voice on wiretaps. Either way, the name fit. By the 1970s, Ruggiero and Gotti were rising through the Gambino ranks. They worked under Angelo della Croce, the family's underboss and mentor to both men. Angelo handled bookmaking, loan sharking, and heroin deals despite the family's strict rule against drugs. It was risky, but the money was too good. When Paul Castellano became boss after Carlo Gambino's death, the divide between the white-collar and blue-collar factions deepened. Castellano's side wanted quiet profits. Gotti's side wanted control. Angelo stood firmly with Gotti. In December 1985, when Castellano and his driver were gunned down outside Sparks' steakhouse, Ruggiero helped secure Gotti's takeover of the Gambino family. For a moment, they were on top. Gotti was the boss. Angelo was one of his most trusted captains, loud, loyal, and proud. But his own habits would be his undoing. The FBI had been listening for years. They'd bugged his house, his phones, even his car. What they caught wasn't just talk, it was evidence. Ruggiero discussed drug deals, family business, and internal tensions, all on tape. When federal agents arrested him in 1985 on heroin trafficking charges, the FBI transcripts revealed details Gotti never wanted public. It was a betrayal without intent, but in the mob, words can kill. Gotti blamed Angelo for being reckless, for putting their entire organization at risk. Their friendship, once unbreakable, began to fracture. The case dragged on for years. Angelo's health collapsed before the courts could finish with him. He was suffering from cancer, and by 1989, he was confined to his home under house arrest. John Gotti, now the Teflon Don, rarely visited. The bond that began in Brooklyn's alleys ended in silence. Angelo Quack Ruggiero died on December 4th, 1989, at the age of 49. He wasn't a boss or a legend or a myth. He was the man caught between loyalty and ambition, the talkative soldier who lived too loud in a world that punished noise. In the end, it wasn't bullets or betrayal that finished him. It was his own voice echoing on tapes he never knew were running. He was born John D'Amico on July 11th, 1939, in Manhattan's Little Italy, a neighborhood where the mob wasn't myth or rumor, it was daily life. The bars, the corner clubs, the storefronts that never seemed to do business, they all belonged to someone. And in that world, the young D'Amico learned fast who those someones were. He was sharp, calm, and loyal, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. By the 1960s, he was already connected to the Gambino crime family, working as a soldier under Carlo Gambino's organization. His mentor was Angelo della Croce, the old-school underboss known for loyalty and discipline. The nickname Jackie Nose came from a crooked break in his nose, the result of a bar fight in his younger days. The name stuck, but unlike many mob nicknames, it wasn't a punchline. Among the Gambinos, Jackie Nose meant something closer to respect, a quiet man who didn't talk out of turn and never lost his cool. By the 1970s, D'Amico had built a reputation as a dependable earner. He handled gambling, shylocking, and labor rackets, mostly in Manhattan. He also became close to John Gotti, who was then a rising enforcer out of Queens. When Gotti took control of the family in 1985 after the murder of Paul Castellano, D'Amico's loyalty was rewarded. He became one of Gotti's most trusted lieutenants, part of the inner circle that met regularly at the Ravenite Social Club in Little Italy. Gotti was the face. D'Amico was the balance, calm, patient, and rarely in the spotlight. When the FBI bugged the Ravenite and recorded Gotti's downfall, D'Amico was caught in the margins of the story, often mentioned, rarely targeted. He understood the golden rule of survival in the mob's later years: stay useful, stay quiet, and stay out of the papers. Through the 1990s and into the 2000s, D'Amico remained active in the Gambino family, even as it fractured under law enforcement pressure. After John Gotti's imprisonment and death in 2002, the family turned to steadier hands, men who could rebuild without the fireworks. D'Amico fit that mold perfectly. In 2008, at nearly 70 years old, he briefly became acting boss of the Gambino family, alongside Domenico Cefalù and Nicholas Carrozzo. His leadership marked a shift from the flamboyant, media-hungry Gotti years back to the traditional, low-profile, Cosa Nostra style. No headlines, no interviews, just business. That same year, federal prosecutors charged him with racketeering and loan sharking. He pleaded guilty to collecting unlawful debts and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. It was a small price for a man who had spent 50 years inside one of America's most powerful criminal families. He was released quietly, returned to his old neighborhood, and disappeared into the background again, the way he always preferred it. John Jackie Nose D'Amico is still remembered as a survivor, a man who navigated the Gambino family through chaos and outlived nearly every boss he ever served. To outsiders, he was another old mobster with a broken nose and a quiet walk. To the men who knew him, he was something rarer, a gangster who understood that power wasn't about noise or fear. It was about knowing when to speak and when to vanish. He was born Salvatore Gravano on March 12, 1945 in Brooklyn, New York, in a neighborhood where toughness wasn't a choice, it was survival. His parents were Sicilian immigrants, honest people. His father worked long hours running a small dress factory. But the streets of Bensonhurst had their own kind of education, and Sammy learned early that respect came from fear. As a boy, he was small for his age. Other kids picked on him. One day, a group tried to steal his bike. Sammy fought back. A local gangster watched the whole thing and said, "That kid fights like a bull." The name stuck. From then on, he was Sammy the Bull. He grew up idolizing the wise guys who ran the block. Sharp suits, Cadillacs, easy confidence. After a short stint in the army, Gravano came home and joined the Colombo family, running burglaries, robberies, and construction shakedowns. He was smart, careful, and ruthless when he needed to be. Before long, the Gambino family noticed him. By the late 1970s, Gravano was working under Paul Castellano, handling construction rackets and union payoffs. He built a fortune in real estate, often through intimidation. But when John Gotti moved against Castellano in 1985, Sammy didn't flinch. He backed Gotti, and when Castellano was gunned down outside Sparks Steakhouse, Gravano became part of the new regime. Under Gotti, Sammy rose fast. He was promoted to underboss of the Gambino family, the second highest rank in the largest mafia organization in America. Gotti was the face, Gravano was the engine. He handled hits, settled disputes, and ran the family's money. By his own later admission, he took part in or approved 19 murders. For a while, it worked. Gotti became a celebrity, the Dapper Don. But fame brought heat. The FBI bugged the Ravenite Social Club in Little Italy, recording Gotti and Gravano in conversation. On those tapes, Gotti mocked his own men, including Sammy. When Gravano heard them played in court, he realized the loyalty wasn't mutual. In 1991, he made the decision no one expected. Gravano flipped. He became the highest-ranking mobster ever to turn government witness. His testimony helped convict John Gotti of murder and racketeering in 1992, ending Gotti's reign and shaking the Mafia's foundation nationwide. For that cooperation, Sammy received a 5-year sentence, time already served. He entered witness protection, but it didn't last. He missed the old life too much. He left the program, moved to Arizona, and tried to start fresh as a construction entrepreneur. In 2000, the FBI came knocking again. Gravano was arrested for running a multi-million-dollar ecstasy ring with his son and associates. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was released in 2017 after 17 years behind bars. Since then, he's spoken publicly through interviews, podcasts, and books about his life inside the Mafia and why he turned against it. Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano remains one of the most infamous figures in organized crime history, both a killer and a witness. To his enemies, he was a traitor. To investigators, he was the man who broke the code of silence that once held the Mafia together. And to himself, he's still what that old gangster saw on the Brooklyn street all those years ago, a bull that refused to back down. He was born John Joseph Gotti on October 27, 1940, in the Bronx, New York. He was the fifth of 13 children in a working-class Italian-American family. His father, John Sr., worked irregular jobs, rarely enough to keep the family steady. The Gotti kids learned early that respect didn't come from paychecks. It came from power. By his teens, Gotti was running errands for neighborhood wise guys in East New York, a tough Brooklyn district run by the Gambino crime family. He quit school at 16 and joined Carmine Fatico's crew, a local capo with deep ties to the family boss, Carlo Gambino. Gotti's job was small-time hijacking, stealing cargo off trucks at JFK Airport. It was quick money, and it built his reputation as a man who could handle himself. His temper was fierce, but his style was sharper. Even before the world called him the Dapper Don, Gotti was known for custom suits, manicured hair, and diamond pinky rings. He didn't look like the men who came before him, the quiet, shadowy mob bosses who avoided attention. Gotti liked the cameras, and the cameras liked him. In 1973, Gotti was sent to kill James McBratney, the man who had kidnapped and murdered Carlo Gambino's nephew. The hit was messy. Gotti was caught and sentenced to 4 years. Inside prison, he kept his mouth shut and earned respect. When he got out, he was rewarded with more responsibility under Agnello Della Croce, the Gambino underboss, and a mentor who guided Gotti through the family's politics. By the mid-1980s, the Gambino boss was Paul Castellano, a businessman type who avoided street guys like Gotti. Tension grew between them. Castellano didn't trust Gotti's temper or his appetite for attention. Gotti in turn saw Castellano as out of touch. On December 16, 1985, Castellano and his driver, Thomas Bellotti, were gunned down outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. The shooters were Gotti's men. Within days, Gotti was the new boss of the Gambino family, the most powerful mafia organization in America. Reporters swarmed him. Cameras followed him from courtrooms to nightclubs. He wore $1,000 suits, smiled for the press, and walked free from 3 major trials in the late 1980s. Every time charges fell apart, witness tampering, jury intimidation, legal strategy, he seemed untouchable. That's when the press gave him 2 names, the Dapper Don for his style, the Teflon Don for how nothing ever stuck. But the streak didn't last. The FBI had been building a case for years. With help from a hidden microphone in Gotti's headquarters, the Ravenite social club in Little Italy, agents recorded him ordering hits and mocking his own men. In December 1990, Gotti was arrested alongside his underboss, Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano. Gravano turned government witness, testifying against Gotti in exchange for leniency. His testimony, combined with hours of FBI tapes, sealed the case. On April 2, 1992, John Gotti was convicted of murder and racketeering. He was sentenced to life without parole. He was sent to the U.S. Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, where he spent the rest of his life in isolation. Gotti died on June 10, 2002, from throat cancer. He was 61. John Gotti left behind a legacy built on charisma, violence, and spectacle. A man who turned the Mafia boss into a public figure, and in doing so, helped bring down the old code of silence that once protected it. He was born Joseph Patrick Lombardo on January 1st, 1929, in Chicago, Illinois, the child of Italian immigrants who worked hard and stayed quiet. His father was a shoemaker. His mother kept the house. They lived near the West Side in a neighborhood where the outfit wasn't a mystery. It was part of the landscape. Lombardo was a bright kid, but school wasn't where his future was. He learned early that in Chicago, the fastest way up was through the rackets. By the 1950s, he was working as a mechanic, a bookmaker, and a collector for mob crews tied to the Chicago outfit. He was sharp, funny, and fearless, traits that made him stand out even in a business built on steel nerves. That sense of humor earned him his nickname, Joey the Clown. He'd joke with reporters outside courtrooms, grin during mugshots, and once pulled his coat over his face with a hand-drawn smile on it for the cameras. To the public, he looked like the mob's comedian. To law enforcement, he was one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. By the 1960s, Lombardo had become a trusted enforcer and loan shark under bosses like Tony Accardo and Joey Aiuppa. He moved up fast, running gambling and extortion rackets across the city. He operated out of the Grand Avenue Crew, a faction known for loyalty, profit, and a streak of violence that kept people in line. Behind the jokes was a man who built empires in the shadows. Lombardo had interest in casinos, unions, and construction firms. He was tied to the Teamsters pension fund, which the outfit used to funnel millions into Las Vegas developments. Federal agents later linked him to the Alan Dorfman murder, a case tied to the collapse of that same fund. In 1974, Lombardo was convicted in a major Teamsters embezzlement case and sentenced to prison. He served his time quietly and came out stronger. When he got out, he didn't retire. He went right back to business, a sign that in the outfit, you didn't quit until you couldn't move. During the 1980s, he kept his distance from the limelight. His crew ran gambling, loan sharking, and union rackets, all while the FBI built cases against the outfit's leadership. In public, Lombardo played the clown, cracking jokes, smiling for reporters, pretending to be retired. In private, he remained a major power in Chicago's underworld. Then came the family secrets trial, the government's final strike against the outfit's old guard. In 2005, Lombardo was indicted for racketeering, bribery, and multiple murders, including that of businessman Daniel Seifert, who'd been killed in 1974 before he could testify against him. Lombardo went on the run. For 9 months, he was one of America's most wanted men. When the FBI finally caught him in 2006, he was 77 years old, living under an alias in suburban Elmwood Park. During the trial, Lombardo kept up the same charm that had defined him. He joked with the judge, smiled at reporters, and insisted he'd been retired for decades. The jury didn't laugh. In 2007, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Joseph "Joey the Clown" Lombardo died on October 19, 2019, at the age of 90. He spent more than half a century inside the Chicago outfit, rising from street soldier to boss, from neighborhood bookie to national figure. To the press, he was the mobster with a grin. To the FBI, he was a calculating killer who hid behind laughter. And to Chicago, he was the last of a generation. Men who could smile for the camera and never blink when the gun came out. He was born Francis Patrick Salemme on August 18, 1933, in Weymouth, Massachusetts, just south of Boston. His father was a printer, a working man who tried to keep his sons straight. But Boston in the 1940s was a city split between poverty, pride, and power. In the neighborhoods of Roxbury and Southie, the lines between hustler and hood blurred quick. Frank grew up tough and restless. He drifted toward the edges of the city's underworld, stolen cars, burglaries, anything that brought cash. He had the look of a street guy, but the mind of a planner. When the Patriarca crime family, New England's branch of La Cosa Nostra, needed muscle, Salemme was there. By the 1960s, he was working under Raymond Patriarca, the boss out of Providence. Frank handled the rough jobs, extortion, debt collection, and when needed, murder. He was sharp, loyal, and dressed better than most of the men around him. He liked Cadillacs, expensive suits, and clean shoes. That habit earned him his nickname, Cadillac Frank. He wasn't flash for the sake of it, he believed image was power. But behind the polish was a man who didn't hesitate when things got dirty. In 1968, Salemme tried to kill lawyer John Fitzgerald, a government witness against the mob. The attempt failed, and Frank went on the run for more than a decade. The FBI finally caught him in 1972. He was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to prison for 16 years. While inside, the Mafia changed. Patriarca died, new bosses came and went. When Salemme walked out in 1988, the old order was broken, and Boston was in chaos. That's when he crossed paths with a name that would define the city's darkest years. James Whitey Bulger. Bulger ran the Winter Hill Gang, the Irish mob that operated parallel to the Italians. The FBI used him as an informant, protecting him while he eliminated rivals. Salemme, now allied with Bulger and his handler, FBI agent John Connolly, maneuvered his way into power. In 1991, after years of blood and betrayal, he became boss of the Patriarca family. Under Cadillac Frank, the family made money again. Drugs, gambling, shakedowns. But the alliance with Bulger and corrupt FBI agents was poison. When federal investigators began exposing the deal between law enforcement and the mob, the house of cards started to collapse. In 1995, Salemme was indicted on racketeering charges and sentenced to prison. Facing decades behind bars, he made a decision no one expected. He flipped. He became a government witness, testifying about corruption inside the FBI and the hidden partnership that had allowed Bulger to operate untouched for years. His cooperation helped expose one of the most embarrassing scandals in the Bureau's history. Salemme entered witness protection, living quietly under new identities. But the past doesn't disappear. In 2016, new evidence surfaced linking him to the 1993 murder of Stephen DeSaro, a nightclub owner who had crossed the wrong people. Federal agents dug up DeSaro's remains behind a Providence mill. The trail led straight to Salemme. In 2018, Francis Cadillac Frank Salemme was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. He died on December 13, 2022, at a federal medical center in Missouri. He was 89. To Boston, he was the last of the old Mafia bosses, half killer, half negotiator, a man who drove Cadillacs and made corpses disappear. To history, he was proof that loyalty in the underworld always ends the same way, traded for survival and buried under the weight of what you've done. He was born Anthony Casso on May 21, 1942, in Brooklyn, New York, in a part of South Brooklyn where mob ties weren't whispered about, they were inherited. His father was a longshoreman with quiet connections to the Lucchese crime family. His mother kept the house, raised the kids, and hoped her son would take a different path. But by the time Anthony was in high school, that hope was gone. He started as an errand boy for bookmakers, running bets and envelopes. Quick, smart, and fiercely ambitious, he rose fast through the ranks. By his 20s, he was working for Christopher Christie Tick Fernery, a Lucchese capo who ran rackets out of Bensonhurst. Casso handled protection, loan sharking, and later, enforcement. He had a temper that scared even the men above him. The nickname Gaspipe followed him early, though no one could ever say exactly where it came from. Some claimed he carried a length of gas pipe as a weapon when he was young. Others said it referred to his cold, mechanical way of killing, efficient, brutal, and silent. Whatever the truth, it fit. By the late 1970s and into the 80s, Casso had become one of the most feared men in New York's underworld. He was a hitman and fixer, running contract killings, union kickbacks, and drug shipments through the Lucchese family's Brooklyn crew. He was close to Vittorio Vic Amuso, another rising star. Together, they would eventually take control of the entire family. When Amuso became boss in 1986, Casso was his underboss, the enforcer who kept everyone in line. Under their rule, the Lucchese's turned ruthless. They killed suspected informants, rival mobsters, and even members of their own crew. Casso ordered dozens of murders personally. By his own later confession, more than 30. He had friends in low places too. Casso built ties with corrupt NYPD detectives Louis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa, later known as the Mafia cops. He paid them thousands in cash for information, tip-offs, even murders. They fed him details from inside law enforcement, who was talking, who was under surveillance, and who needed to disappear. But by the early 1990s, the law was closing in. In 1990, after a string of indictments, Casso went on the run. He was finally captured in 1993 in New Jersey, living under an alias, carrying weapons, and surrounded by cash. Facing multiple life sentences, he made a decision that shocked the Mafia world. Anthony Gaspipe Casso flipped. He became one of the highest-ranking mobsters ever to turn government witness, detailing murders, payoffs, and corruption across the 5 families. But his cooperation didn't last. Casso couldn't control his temper. He threatened agents, lied repeatedly, and bragged about crimes that horrified prosecutors. The government dropped him as a witness, a rare, almost unheard-of move. He was sentenced to 13 consecutive life terms in federal prison. Even behind bars, Casso stayed defiant. He gave interviews, claimed he'd been betrayed, and said he'd killed more people than he could count. To the end, he never expressed remorse, only pride in his power. In 2020, during the pandemic, Anthony Casso contracted the virus while in custody. He died on December 15, 2020, at the age of 78. Anthony Gaspipe Casso was the embodiment of the Mafia's most violent years, a man who rose through loyalty and fear, ruled through murder, and fell through his own arrogance. To the streets, he was the enforcer who made people vanish. To the FBI, he was both a treasure and a curse. And to history, he stands as a reminder that some men weren't made for power, they were built for destruction.